Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is June the 10th. It is Friday, and today we're going to talk about what is one of mine and likely some of yours as well, worst fears, and that is snake bites. Now, I guess the good news coming out of that fear is that UAB is home now to the nation's first comprehensive snake bite follow-up care clinic. Now, today I am joined by Dr. Dag Shapshak, who is a co-director of this comprehensive clinic at UAB, along with Dr. Rushton. Now, this is a clinic that mainly provides follow-up care and checks in on patients after they have unfortunately gotten bit by a snake there. So, Dr. Shapshak, there's a lot to unpack here. Again, this is one of my worst fears. I think a lot of people as well. But this is the first type of clinic like this in the nation for snake bites. So tell me a little bit about the clinic and why this was important to have at least one in the country and why there hasn't been one before now.
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here and to talk about the program. One of the deficits that we have in care in this country is after a patient is treated as an inpatient for snake envenomation, we realized nowhere for them to go. And there was very little information and studies that we had understanding the long-term complications and consequences about how this can impact their lives. So at UAB, we provide the physicians who run Alabama poison control. And most of the patients that are envenomated, when they go to any hospital in the state, they usually contact poison control that helps guide them through the acute phase in terms of using anti-venom and other recommendations for their care. And nationwide, that's usually where the expertise stops. So when the patient is discharged from the hospital, you have patients that very often have issues with open wounds, blistering, swelling. The venom itself can cause extensive muscle and tendon damage. They may have issues with range of motion and pain. And there was no defined care pathway for these patients to be able to have those consequences followed up in an appropriate fashion. So what we found and realized is that when I was collaborating with our toxicology group who runs poison control, all of those needs are actually met in existing centers that deal with long-term chronic wounds. And these centers are everywhere, pretty much. A lot of hospitals have them. These centers specialize in usually, people with diabetes or, bad other medical problems like cancer that cause a lot of wounds and swelling. But our techniques that we use to treat those issues, we realized could be applied to these snake bite patients to help them with improving strength, improving skin care, limiting swelling, reducing pain, and being able to help kind of follow them to see who needs physical therapy, who doesn't, who needs more specialized wound care, who doesn't. And it's taken a lot of burden off of not just the toxicologists who were remotely handling this. You had a toxicologist getting an email with a picture of a snake bite after the person had been discharged a week or two later with these complications going, what do I do? And trying to remotely manage. So we offer this follow-up, not just for patients treated locally here in Birmingham, but we at least offer it to anyone that is involved in who's had poison control involved in their care, helping direct it. So we've had people drive in from hours away, or patients that are local that were bit, far away in another state, other area that were admitted that are now returning home. We're able to get them plugged into our clinic and have those issues addressed.
Well, one thing I think is interesting, and you kind of noted on this, is that oftentimes when a person is bit by a snake, they go into their local emergency department, their emergency physicians consult with poison control, they treat them, maybe they stay overnight, but then they leave. And that is just a reality of our medical facilities. Our emergency departments are so overwhelmed, and people need those facilities, need those beds. So this person is treated and then sent home. But there was some information, I believe, from the snakebite center that you provided that some venom, I believe it was rattlesnake venom in particular can take several days before you even really see the effects of that venom and before it gets totally in your bloodstream. So at that point, a patient probably doesn't want to go back to the ER. Nobody wants to go to the ER, right? And at the same time, they might say, well, my local doc in the box, they're probably not equipped to handle this. They probably don't have a toxicologist or a wound care specialist in house. Where do I go? So this seems to kind of have maybe made that process easier for people who say, look, 5 days ago I got bit. Now my arm is purple. I don't know what to do.
You're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. And we can talk about the different kind of snakes that we have here in Alabama. What's interesting about snake and snake venom is that every species of snake has a different kind of venom. And the venom isn't just one type of poison or molecule. There are dozens, if not hundreds, and all of them are different sizes and actually cause the harm at different times. So some of these poisons are designed to start digesting, the prey. So if they're biting a rat, they poison the rat runs away. Some of the poison is there to kind of affect the nerves of the rat, so it kind of gets paralyzed. But then other parts of the poison are there to already start pre-digesting the rat. So the injury that it causes isn't just to, just the local tissue, the skin break, but it also harms the lymph system, which helps control swelling, as well as causing all the blood vessels to get very leaky. And so the three most common venomous snakes that we're going to see in Alabama are rattlesnake, a cottonhead, or a copperhead, and a cottonmouth. Maybe mix those up.
No, you had it. You had it from an
Yeah.
Alabama native. I've seen all of them. You had it right.
Right, those three. Now, incidentally, there is a fourth type, just to be technical, called a coral snake, but that mostly they're small and they live along the coast, along the water area. They're very shy. We really don't see very many bites by them. But those other three actually cause different kinds of injury. So the rattlesnake causes less injury to your leg or arm, but the poison, when it's in your system, causes your blood. It acts like a blood thinner. And so it causes potentially a lot of excessive bleeding. It basically starts chewing up your clotting factors that you have in your blood. And so we monitor initially when they're in the hospital, their like how much of an effect is having on their blood. And that is one of the ways that we titrate if the person requires more antivenom. Because as you alluded to earlier, the different types of venom are released at different times. So up front, you may get some initial antivenom, and everything is fine and looking better. And then a little later, you may start getting worse as other antivenom that's not inactivated yet goes ahead and gets into your blood system. So the rattlesnakes actually cause more of a whole body, or what we call a systemic issue, but the other two cause more localized injury. They actually usually don't cause that thinning effect in your blood, but instead cause much more injury in the leg or arm to that extremity.
It's a situation as well. I think that, and thank God I'm going to knock on every piece of wood I have. I've never been bit by a snake, but I can imagine that when you are, the initial shock of that just is immediately what sends you into an emergency room, or the closest physician you can find is just oh my gosh, I just got bit by a snake. And then if your symptoms kind of subside, or if your arm is not falling off, the next day you think, oh, I'm okay. I can get through this. And then the shock is down a little bit for maybe 3 to 5 days later, when some of those other symptoms start appearing. I wonder if some people even are not relating the two, or are not expecting it. I do want to take a quick second. I've got a comment here from somebody named Kelly, and Kelly has an interesting story. She said, I wish that this was here in 2010. I got bit by a water moccasin. It's taken years to recover from. She said, I was paralyzed after 6 days. It's taken over 41 doctors and specialists to put me back together. And, I think that, Kelly, is horrible as that sounds, there are probably more people like Kelly out there, maybe a rare number, but people who this is not just a bad day or a bad week. This takes years to recover from. So tell me a little bit about that, and about people
Absolutely.
like Kelly that are living with this.
So absolutely. In fact, and starting with your earlier, comment about, when someone gets bit, when do they go seek care? Well, what's interesting, even if you get bit by a venomous snake, the estimate is about half of the bites are what we call dry bites. So there is no venom. So they get the puncture wound, and they really don't have any effects from the venom. So people will sometimes self-select out. If you are envenomated, usually it's so painful that you're probably not going to wait several days. Though we had someone recently who did that. And of course, it was actually a rattlesnake bite. And this gentleman waited till the next day or two and he started kind of feeling terrible. So he had less pain because it was a rattlesnake. It was more of a systemic problem. He had less pain locally, in the arm or leg where people get bit. And thus, when he showed up to the hospital, it had already caused a tremendous amount of injury in his coagulation, in basically his blood was completely thinned out. It was very life threatening. And then obviously he was a little sicker. It took a little while to get him better. But the next question you asked about the long-term, what we call morbidity or problems, is a big problem, and that's something that's not well described. So we really don't have great data because no one tracks it until now in terms of understanding what percent of people are going to get what kind of problem. But if you are treated with anti-venom, it definitely decreases that, because the injury, unlike other things, if you don't inactivate the venom for days or weeks afterwards, it can continue causing injury. And so that's usually isn't what happens after an injury. So it's a little counterintuitive. People are like, why am I getting worse? And so, that's what we're trying to help, not just treat, but also identify, so we're able to give, from a national perspective, be able to give, information to other providers across the country so that they can create, similar programs to serve their populations.
Well, and doctor, the percentage of people who are bit by a snake who pass away from those injuries is pretty low, right? But what about the percentage of people who develop these either long-term problems or maybe short-term problems, but that are severe problems?
Right, and this is what I was saying. We don't know. There is a
Mm.
snake bite registry based in Arizona, but you're first off very right. In North America, we don't have the same snake species that you'll have in Australia and Asia, where those snake species, their poisons are a lot more deadly and actually cause your whole body to, have a lot of multi-system organ problems. So luckily, our snakes here, while they can be very injurious, usually are not life-threatening. But that should not dissuade people from understanding the severity that they can have, because something like persistent pain and range of motion and strength issues in an extremity can be disabling, especially if it's not, assessed and treated up front. Then they increase the chances of long-term pain and problem just getting around and doing your normal, activities of daily living.
Well, and I have a question here from Margaret I want to ask you as well. And we know that unfortunately this is snake season, right? If you are out walking, you might see several in the street. If you're gardening, you might find some in your pots. Always wear those gardening gloves for that. I've been there. It's not fun. Question then from Margaret. And she says, how common are snake bites in Alabama and where do they most commonly take place? I'm not sure if she means in region or on the body, but I'd be interested to know both.
So, bunch of great questions. I'll try to answer as much as I can with that. So I would say, it's interesting because there's a difference between accidental and non-accidental envenomations. So like the literature out there supports the idea that most accidental envenomations happen on the leg. You're walking, you step near it, it leaps out and bites your leg. Non-accidental, which would be from snake handling, or we had a gentleman that was in a graveyard, saw a snake, tried to grab it, it bit its hand. So then he tried to grab it again, bit its hand again. And that, what we would call is non-accidental, that happens more on the upper extremities because of people are handling it. In our clinic, we see about half and half. So about half the time it's on the leg, about half the time it's on the hand or arm is where we see it. In terms of where in Alabama, I am not able to say if there are particular hotspots. What we do is we have seen cases of snake envenomations all over the state. So I don't know if there's any area that we can say really is, safe from that or something not to be considered. And then I'm sorry, what was the third question?
Just how common are they in
Oh,
Alabama? Do you have
okay. Well, I'll tell you about. No, great question. So we track every snake bite that comes through Alabama Poison Control. So we're not going to know if someone is the case you said earlier, where they got bit and didn't seek health care, or if they went to a local hospital and they didn't call poison control, which usually they do. We have had 50 some odd in the last year and a half. This season has been a very busy season. So snake bites, because of their activity, we have a peak in snake bite season somewhere between late March up until about July. And then in very early July, it gets too hot, so they're not very active during the peak season. And then on the back end, for the end of August to about October, we see another peak. I would say we have seen somewhere between 20 and 30 just this spring. It feels busier than prior years.
Well, and I have a question for you here that is just a personal myth busting that I want to play with you. And that is, we have all heard, or at least most of us, I think, have heard that baby snakes, especially baby copperheads,
Well,
are more venomous than their mothers, their fathers, or adult counterparts. Is that true?
so I am not necessarily like a scientist specifically in that field. So I would not want to be held to this. I believe that is not grounded in evidence. So I've heard that too, but I don't think, I could be wrong. If there are snake handlers and snake breeders out there that can totally correct me, I will stand to be corrected. I don't think that that's true.
And I also wonder the amount of people who either come into an emergency department and then you see on follow up. How many times do people actually know what snake bit them? I feel like most people, if they're in this unfortunate situation where you said maybe not the snake handlers or the people trying to grab them with their bare hands, but who are just out for a walk with their dogs and happen to get bit, how many times do people actually say, I saw it, it was a copperhead, I know what it was? And how many times do people say, I have no idea, I screamed, I passed out, and we're here?
Great question. Great question. And I'm actually shocked that people are able to identify them so often. People in Alabama are perhaps a lot more familiar, being a lot more outdoorsy state than other areas. And I'd say about 2/3 of the time, people say with confidence what bit them. Now, what's interesting, and this speaks also to the specialization of our toxicologists, based on the blood work and the effect of what we call tags and other things like fibrinogen, and without going too far into it, by looking at the blood work, our toxicologists can often sometimes identify what the snake is, because of the effect that it has on the body. So for especially with rattlesnakes, I would say about 1/3 of the time, if the person says they're not really sure, which to me feels low because I would think it'd be most of the time, but it's only about 1/3 time they're not able to. But I think it's really cool that our toxicologists are so brilliant and specialized that they're able to identify snakes based on the blood work. I think that's pretty cool.
Well, that and also too, I don't know if you are on Facebook or social media, but every neighborhood group I feel like in Alabama all summer is just what kind of snake is this? And people identify them. And that's always pretty cool to me as
Yeah.
well, because whether I don't want any of them to be honest in my yard, but I'd rather have just the harmless garden snake and know that it's harmless than the alternative there. Now, I know the first comprehensive snake bite care center, it opened last year, mid 2021, and you saw 17 patients last year. You said you've had a pretty busy year so far. What are you on track to do this year? What are your expectations there?
Let me turn off this alarm. I'm sorry. So,
It's with the best of us.
that's a good question. We don't have that much of an expectation in terms of like that we know how many because of the factors you described. I think that as awareness and education grows about the importance of getting, for example, especially if you're in a lot of pain, the necessity for CroFab and involving the specialist with poison control, which is a supported service. Like it's a free call. It's a 1-800 number, and you get immediate access to incredible specialists. So not just hospitals use it, but people use it too for advice about when to seek help also that are followed. And I think that as awareness grows, we may be seeing more people involved in programs like ours, as well as with poison control. But I think that's because perhaps of education and awareness, as opposed to an increase in the actual bites. So as I said before, we don't know exactly how many happen, but my guess would be probably about 30, probably less than 50, more than 30, like per season, would be not
Now,
surprising.
you and Dr. Rushton, who is with Alabama Poison Control, are the co-directors of this center. Again, opened mid last year, and it seems kind of common sense that we would have something like this in Alabama. But again, this is the first in the nation. Why did it take so long to get this up and running, Doctor?
That is a really good question. I think that actually speaks to the way the world in general and also medicine has become, where everyone has become such a subspecialist in their niche field that very often people are kind of unaware of the services and how to utilize the services of other specialties. So in this case, this was a for example, the toxicologist running poison control, they didn't know that we do the things that we do and are able to help them. And from our standpoint, we didn't know that there's a collection of people out there that can be served with our specialization that aren't being linked to us. And so I think this speaks to UAB being such an incredible resource in terms of having such specialization that we are under the same roof. And this really it started almost accidentally, where I was walking by Dr. Rushton when he was on a call looking at some emailed pictures, trying to remotely direct and give advice, also outside of their specialty in terms of, wound care and swelling control and all these things. And they're giving advice, but they don't know necessarily all the techniques that we're able to provide, as well as being able to do an in-person evaluation. So de facto, like you talked about follow-up earlier, the follow-up is coming from, over the phone by someone who's trying to figure it out with a blurry picture. So when we saw that, I said, look, I think what we offer can actually help all these problems these people have. These are things that we do. We usually are seeing it in a different population, but we can apply that to them. And, when we started it, we knew we had immediate success just based on the volume and the feedback, where so many people are like, not just thanking from the patients, but also a lot of the local primary doctors. So you're bitten and you are, I have no one else to follow with. I go see my regular general practitioner, internal medicine, family doctor, and they will sometimes were refusing to not refusing, but were reluctant to see patients because they're like, I don't know what to do with a snake bite. I know they can get long-term problems, whether it's the issue with the systemic, blood issues or local things. I don't know what to do. And so even just having us as a resource, we can often sometimes help someone who maybe lives 3-4 hours away that can't make the commute up. And then suddenly pediatricians and primary doctors are more willing to see them, knowing that if they do see something that is, concerning or serious, or they have a question about, they can call us or they can call poison control, and we're able to, help them through that and give them advice. And that's, I think, also then just outside of Birmingham, given a greater resource to people, because it's hard to practice medicine sometimes when you're not comfortable with something and you feel like you're alone and you wouldn't know who to turn to if you need more specialized help.
So if somebody is bitten, and I hope it's not any of you, but if somebody is bitten by a snake, what should they do? Should they call you? Should they call poison
No,
control? Go straight to the
great
ER?
question.
What do we do?
Poison control is the way to go. So we're our clinic. So we think of this as a UAB snake envenomation program that actually kind of has 3 phases. One is on the front end, the advice poison control can give, not just to the emergency room physicians here at UAB, but are available to the entire state, all those emergency departments. And they know this and they're utilizing it. We'll call poison control for advice, dosing. When do I start? I start this. Okay, when do I need to give more? Does this person need to be admitted? Does this person need to be transferred? All of these questions they're able to handle on the front end. And then we have the second phase where you're an inpatient. And very often these patients only need to stay in the hospital 1 to 3 days. You're monitoring their blood to make sure they're not having those, like rattlesnake complications. Also checking the progression of swelling. in the limb to see if they need more, crofab or, other kind of anti-venom. And then when they're discharged, that's when the specific clinic is able to kind of take it from there. But we still stay integrated with poison control, because as we draw labs and if they're abnormal, poison control is able to tell us, does this person need more anti-venom, kind of, those kind of things. So it's very integrated. And yeah, you would not call our clinic, which is the follow-up clinic, you would call poison control, and they're so great at coordinating, referring, and we stay in constant communication with them. So we're able to get every single person. We made a decision that every single person in Alabama that poison control is involved in, we will offer follow-up and advice after follow-up to every single Alabamian who is bitten by a snake that poison control is aware of. So even if you are uninsured, we find a way to be able to come see you in clinic also. So we just want to provide that service to the entire state.
So even if you don't have insurance, call poison control and they will get in contact with your program, and your program will handle that follow-up. And one more question as well. If you got bit several years ago, or if you got bit at a time when this clinic was not open and you believe you still have after effects, can people get in contact with the Poison Control Center in your program, or are you just
that's a good question, because at that point, though, what you're probably looking at are things that usually we're going to see things like that involve like physical therapy or potential nerve damage. So things like persistent swelling or wounds, you're going to see a lot of that, like lymphedema wounds, in the more acute phase. But in the longer term phase, things like, it's really a lot. It's going to be, physical therapy, those kind of things that really deal with strength and movement, which people can have sequela for. Poison control is always the conduit. So we ask that people don't call our clinic directly, though you can. But the way we have our system set up, there's a 1-800 number. It's manned 24/7. And they are such a knowledgeable and great group in terms of coordination that they can usually answer the questions and are able to help, also explain kind of what we offer and what they offer and kind of what this person may need. So I'm going to always say, poison control, it's available. We know what we're doing. And, I would encourage them to use that resource.
And what is the number for poison control?
I don't know.
That's why I thought that might be. So I am pulling it up now. I've got Joan asking.
Yeah, I know. I'll have poison control. Again, because I'm not direct, I work with them, but Dr. Rushton and Dr. Addy, their group is the one that actually runs that. And I don't know.
All right, Joan, the Alabama Poison Control, if you want to bookmark this, God willing, you never need it. Bookmark it, save it. Poison Control, Alabama Poison Control, it's 800-222-1222. That's again, 800-222-1222, available 24 hours a day. You don't have to have insurance to call, and it could save your life. So Dr. Shapshak, thank you so much for all of this information. I hope nobody needs it, but in case they do, at least they know now.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for allowing us to come talk about our program, and we're excited to continue to grow and service, all of our, residents of the state, and hopefully having an even greater big impact in the future.
Well, and hopefully not a busy year, right? Doctor,
that's right. We hope we don't see any. We always hope we don't see anyone, but if they're needed, we're here.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Everybody watching, thank you so much. Have a great